The advertisement in the Boston Herald promised a respectable rancher seeking a wife for companionship and help managing his homestead in the Arizona Territory. And Beatrice Thorne had answered it with the cold practicality of a woman who had run out of better options. She folded the response letter with fingers that trembled only slightly, sealed it with wax that dripped like blood onto the cream paper, and told herself this transaction would at least guarantee her survival in a world that offered women like her precious few alternatives. 3 months later, Beatrice stood on the platform of the Holbrook Depot in Arizona Territory, her wool traveling dress wholly unsuitable for the scorching September heat of 1883, watching a tall figure separate himself from the shimmering waves rising off the dusty Main Street. The man approaching wore typical rancher's attire, dusty boots, worn denim, and a hat that cast his face in shadow, but something in his stride suggested an easy confidence rather than the desperate urgency she had expected from a man advertising for a mail-order bride. "Miss Thorne." His voice carried a warmth that seemed at odds with the businesslike nature of their arrangement, and when he removed his hat, Beatrice found herself looking into eyes the color of sage leaves after rain, set in a sun-weathered face that couldn't have been much past 30. "I'm Wyatt Nichols." "Welcome to Holbrook, Mr. Nichols." Beatrice extended her hand for a businesslike shake, determined to establish the professional boundaries of their arrangement from the first moment. "Thank you for meeting me. I trust the journey wasn't too inconvenient." Something flickered across Wyatt's features, amusement perhaps, or maybe disappointment, but he recovered quickly and gestured toward a wagon hitched nearby. "Not at all. Ranch is about 8 miles northeast of town. We can get your things loaded and head out before the heat gets much worse, if that suits you." "That would be acceptable." Beatrice maintained her formal tone, though sweat was already trickling down her spine beneath the layers of her Eastern clothing. She had 2 trunks containing everything she owned in the world, a pitiful collection of belongings for a woman of 22 years. But Wyatt lifted them into the wagon bed, as though they weighed nothing, muscles flexing beneath his shirt in a way that made her look quickly away. The ride to the ranch passed in uncomfortable silence initially, with Beatrice gripping the wagon seat as they jolted over rutted roads that bore no resemblance to Boston's cobblestone streets. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, punctuated by strange twisted trees and rock formations that looked like ancient sentinels guarding secrets she couldn't begin to imagine. "Those are junipers," Wyatt said suddenly, following her gaze, "and pinyon pines. Further north you get ponderosas, tall as church steeples. Country takes some getting used to, but it grows on you." "I'm sure it does." Beatrice kept her voice neutral, unwilling to admit that the vast emptiness terrified her almost as much as it fascinated her. In Boston, she'd been surrounded by buildings and people and the constant noise of civilization. Here, the silence felt almost alive, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the distant cry of a bird she couldn't identify. Wyatt tried again. "We'll have the ceremony tomorrow if that works for you. Reverend Carlson comes through Holbrook twice a month, and he's due in town at noon. Figured you might want a night to settle in first, get your bearings. I've set up the spare room for you." "That's very considerate." The words came out stiffer than Beatrice intended, but she couldn't seem to soften them. This was a transaction, an arrangement for mutual benefit, and she refused to pretend otherwise. She'd learned the hard way that expectations led only to disappointment. The Nichols Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a collection of low buildings clustered around a modest 2-story house that looked surprisingly well maintained. Corrals stretched to one side, containing horses that lifted their heads curiously as the wagon approached. Everything spoke of hard work and careful attention, not the desperate bachelor establishment Beatrice had steeled herself to encounter. "Built the main house 5 years ago," Wyatt said, a note of pride creeping into his voice. "Got about 300 head of cattle, 20 horses, and enough grazing land to support twice that if I wanted. Water rights to a good creek that runs year-round. Place does well. It seems very prosperous." Beatrice studied the property with the calculating eye of someone assessing an investment, which in essence she supposed she was. "You must work very hard. I've got 2 ranch hands who help with the day-to-day operations. Martin and Jose have been with me 3 years now. Good men, hard workers. They bunk in the smaller building over there." Wyatt pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house and set the brake. "But yeah, ranching keeps you busy. That's part of why I figured it was time to find a wife." The blunt honesty should have reassured Beatrice, confirming that they were on the same practical page regarding this arrangement, but instead it sent an unexpected pang through her chest. She pushed the feeling aside firmly and allowed Wyatt to help her down from the wagon, ignoring the way his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The interior of the house surprised her again. Rough-hewn wooden floors had been swept clean, and simple furniture filled the rooms with a masculine practicality that somehow managed not to feel entirely unwelcoming. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main living area, and windows on 3 sides let in abundant light. The kitchen featured a cast iron stove that looked new and well-maintained, with shelves lined with preserved goods and basic cooking supplies. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Wyatt said, carrying her trunks as though they weighed nothing. "My room is at the end of the hall. There's a washroom between them, real modern convenience. Had a cistern system installed last year that brings water right into the house." Beatrice followed him up the narrow stairs, hyper-aware of his proximity in the confined space. The room he showed her was small but clean, with a real bed frame and mattress, a wardrobe, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin decorated with tiny blue flowers. A window overlooked the eastern pastures, where cattle grazed in the distance beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "Thank you," she said quietly, and this time genuine gratitude softened her tone. "This is very nice." Wyatt set down her trunks and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Miss Thorne, Beatrice, if I may, I know this situation is unconventional. I know you don't know me from Adam, and you're trusting a lot by coming all this way. I want you to know that I meant what I said in my letters. I'm looking for a partner, not a servant. Whatever happens between us, however this arrangement works out, you'll be treated with respect in this house. That's a promise." The speech, clearly prepared and delivered with obvious sincerity, threatened to crack something in the careful armor Beatrice had constructed around herself. She looked away from those 2 kind eyes and smoothed her skirts with hands that wanted to tremble. "I appreciate that, Mr. Nichols, and I assure you I intend to fulfill my obligations as your wife to the best of my ability. You'll find me a competent housekeeper and a hard worker." "I'm sure I will." Something in his voice made her glance up sharply, but his expression remained neutral. "Why don't you take some time to freshen up and rest from the journey? I'll put together some supper and we can talk more this evening." "You cook?" The question escaped before Beatrice could stop it, surprise overriding her careful formality. A smile tugged at Wyatt's mouth, the first genuine expression of amusement she'd seen from him. "Had to learn after my mother passed 8 years ago. I won't claim to be fancy, but I can manage the basics without poisoning anyone. Usually." Despite herself, despite all her determination to keep this businesslike and distant, Beatrice felt her own lips curve slightly in response. That's reassuring, I suppose. High praise indeed. Wyatt's smile widened briefly before he sobered again. Really, though, rest. It's a long journey from Boston, and tomorrow will be a big day. After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Beatrice sank onto the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment of weakness. Her hands shook as she unpinned her hat, and her eyes burned with tears she absolutely refused to shed. This was fine. This was what she'd chosen, what she'd needed to do. Wyatt Nichols seemed like a decent man, the ranch was prosperous, and she would have security and purpose. That was more than most women in her position could hope for. She thought of her father's death 2 years ago, the debts that had consumed everything. Her aunt's cold charity that came with constant reminders of Beatrice's burdened status. She thought of the limited options available to an unmarried woman with no family money and only a basic education, teaching positions that paid barely enough to survive, or worse alternatives she refused to consider. This marriage was a transaction that would benefit them both, and she would make it work through sheer determination if nothing else. By the time Beatrice washed her face and changed into a simpler dress more suited to the climate, the smell of cooking meat and bread drifted up from downstairs. She descended to find Wyatt at the stove, stirring something in a cast iron pot that smelled surprisingly appealing. He'd removed his hat and vest, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and tanned dark from outdoor work. "Hope you like beef stew," he said without turning around. "It's about my signature dish, if you can call it that. Got fresh bread from town this morning, too. It smells wonderful." Beatrice hovered uncertainly in the doorway, unsure of her role in this strange domestic scene. "Can I help with anything? You could set the table if you want. Dishes are in that cabinet there, silverware in the drawer beneath." They worked in oddly companionable silence, moving around each other in the kitchen space with more ease than Beatrice would have expected. When they sat down to eat at the small wooden table, she found the stew actually was quite good, hearty and well-seasoned, the bread fresh and soft. "You didn't mention in your letters why you decided to advertise for a wife," Beatrice said after a few minutes, deciding that direct questions fit the business-like nature of their arrangement. Surely there are women in the territory who would be interested in a prosperous rancher. Wyatt took a drink of water, considering his response. "There are a few families scattered around, but not many unmarried women. Those that are here have known me since I was a kid covered in mud and causing trouble. Hard to see someone romantic like when you remember them at 12 years old with a black eye from some fool stunt." He paused, then continued more seriously. "And I guess I liked the idea of someone coming in fresh, without preconceptions. Someone choosing this life deliberately, not just falling into it because it's what's expected." "That makes sense," Beatrice admitted. "And my reasons were equally practical, as I explained in my correspondence. I have no family remaining, no prospects in Boston, and limited options for supporting myself. This arrangement provides security for both of us." "Is that really all you want?" Wyatt asked quietly. "Just security?" The question unsettled her, suggesting depths to this transaction she wasn't prepared to explore. "What else is there?" she countered. "We're strangers entering into a practical arrangement. Isn't it better to be honest about that than to pretend some romantic notion that doesn't exist?" "I suppose." But Wyatt looked disappointed, and something about that disappointment bothered Beatrice more than she wanted to admit. "Though I hope we won't stay strangers. Hard to build a life with someone you don't at least try to know." "Of course," Beatrice said quickly. "I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. I simply think it's important to maintain realistic expectations." Who hurt you? The question came gently, but it hit like a physical blow. Beatrice's fork clattered against her plate, and she stared at Wyatt with wide eyes. I beg your pardon. Someone hurt you, Wyatt repeated, his sage green eyes far too perceptive. Someone made you think the only safe way to approach life is like it's a business transaction. I'm just wondering who it was. Beatrice stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. That's presumptuous and entirely inappropriate. You don't know anything about me. You're right, I don't, but I'd like to. Wyatt remained seated, his voice calm and steady. That's all I'm saying, Beatrice. I'd like to know you. The real you, not just the careful, controlled version you're showing me. No pressure, no expectations, just honest interest. She wanted to flee, to retreat to her room and lock the door against his uncomfortable perceptiveness. Instead, she forced herself to remain still, to meet his eyes with as much composure as she could muster. His name was Thomas Whitfield. He was a clerk in my father's firm, charming and ambitious. He courted me for 6 months with pretty words and promises. Then my father died, the debts came to light, and Thomas disappeared faster than morning dew. He married a merchant's daughter 2 months later. Does that satisfy your curiosity? I'm sorry, Wyatt said simply. That was a cruel thing for him to do. It was practical, Beatrice corrected, though the words tasted bitter. Why would he tie himself to a penniless woman when he could do better? At least he was honest about his priorities in the end. That's not honesty, it's cowardice. Wyatt's voice carried a hint of steel. Real honesty would have been telling you straight out that he was courting your father's money, not you. Letting you believe otherwise and then vanishing when circumstances changed. That's just cruelty dressed up as practicality. Beatrice found she had no response to that. She sat back down slowly, her righteous anger deflating into something more complicated and painful. Regardless, it taught me a valuable lesson about expectations and reality. Maybe, Wyatt allowed. Or maybe it taught you the wrong lesson. Not every man is Thomas Whitfield. And how am I supposed to know the difference? The question came out more vulnerable than Beatrice intended, revealing more than she wanted to show. Time, I suppose, and paying attention to actions instead of just words. Wyatt pushed back from the table and began clearing dishes. But for what it's worth, I'll try to show you the difference. No pressure, like I said, just patience and time. That night, lying in her unfamiliar bed listening to the strange sounds of the Arizona Territory darkness, Beatrice replayed the conversation over and over. She'd come here expecting a simple transaction, a straightforward exchange of housekeeping and companionship for security and status. Instead, she'd found a man who looked at her with disconcerting perception and talked about getting to know the real her, as though such a thing mattered in a practical arrangement. It was terrifying, and if she was being honest with herself in the privacy of her own thoughts, just a little bit intriguing. The wedding ceremony the next day was brief and businesslike, conducted in Holbrook's small church with only Reverend Carlson and 2 witnesses, a shopkeeper named Mrs. Henderson and her husband, present. Beatrice wore her best dress, a dove gray silk that had been fashionable in Boston 2 years ago, and Wyatt had cleaned up impressively in dark trousers and a pressed white shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. Do you, Wyatt Benjamin Nichols, take Beatrice Thorne to be your lawfully wedded wife? Reverend Carlson intoned with practiced solemnity. I do. Wyatt's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Beatrice's face. And do you, Beatrice Thorne, take Wyatt Benjamin Nichols to be your lawfully wedded husband? Beatrice took a breath, sealing her fate with 2 small words. I do. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and before God, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Wyatt leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. His lips brushed hers gently, a chaste kiss that nevertheless sent an unexpected warmth through her body. When he pulled back, something in his expression had softened, become more intimate. "Hello, wife," he murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "Hello, husband," Beatrice responded automatically and felt a strange flutter in her chest at the words. They signed the marriage certificate with witnesses attesting, and then it was done. Beatrice Nichols, formerly Thorne, wife of a rancher in Arizona Territory. The reality of it didn't quite sink in until they were back in the wagon heading toward the ranch, a pair of thin gold bands now circling their ring fingers. "I got these from the jeweler in town last week," Wyatt said, glancing at his own ring. "Hope the size is about right. I can have it adjusted if needed." Beatrice looked down at the band on her finger, simple and unadorned but solid. "It's perfect," she said truthfully. "Thank you." Seemed important to do it proper. Wyatt guided the horses around a particularly deep rut. "Even if the circumstances are unusual, I wanted you to have a real ring, a real ceremony, wanted to do right by you." That careful consideration, that obvious effort to maintain propriety and respect, should have reassured Beatrice. Instead, it made her feel guilty for her own coldness, her determination to keep this purely transactional. "You've been very thoughtful," she said quietly. "More than I probably deserve, given my attitude." "You deserve to be treated well," Wyatt said firmly. "That's not something you have to earn, Beatrice. That's just basic human decency." The conversation haunted her as they returned to the ranch and fell into the rhythm of evening chores. Wyatt showed her around the property more thoroughly, introducing her to the two ranch hands who regarded her with polite but reserved courtesy. Martin was older, somewhere in his 50s, with a weathered face and quiet manner. Jose was younger, perhaps 25, with a quick smile and obvious respect for Wyatt. "Boss is a good man," Jose told her while Wyatt was showing Martin something in the far corral. "Fair, honest, works as hard as anyone. You'll be happy here, I think." "I hope so," Beatrice replied, meaning it more than she'd expected. That evening, back in the house with the door closed against the cooling desert night, Beatrice felt the weight of reality settle over her. This was her wedding night, though what exactly that meant in the context of their arrangement remained unclear. Wyatt had been nothing but respectful, had given her a separate room, but they were legally married now, and certain expectations came with that state. As if reading her thoughts, Wyatt cleared his throat from where he stood by the fireplace. "I figure we should talk about sleeping arrangements and such. I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." Beatrice felt her cheeks heat but forced herself to meet his eyes. "We're married now. Legally and in the eyes of the church. I understand what that entails." "Maybe legally," Wyatt said carefully, "but I'm not interested in claiming rights that you're not comfortable giving. The separate rooms can stay separate as long as you want. We can take time to get to know each other, build some trust and friendship first. This doesn't have to be rushed." The relief that flooded through Beatrice was so intense it was almost painful. She'd steeled herself for an entirely different conversation, had prepared to fulfill obligations she wasn't emotionally ready for with a man who was still essentially a stranger. His unexpected consideration threatened to undo her careful composure entirely. "That's very understanding of you," she managed. "Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. It's just decent behavior." Wyatt ran a hand through his dark hair, looking oddly uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "I meant what I said yesterday. I'm hoping this can be a real partnership, maybe even more someday if we're lucky. But that kind of thing can't be forced or rushed. It grows natural-like, or it doesn't grow at all. You're an unusual man, Wyatt Nichols. Beatrice said softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." His smile was gentle, lacking any trace of the disappointment or frustration another man might have shown. "Now, how about I teach you how to make coffee the way we do it out here? Fair warning, it's strong enough to wake the dead, but you get used to it." They spent the evening in companionable domesticity, and Beatrice found herself relaxing incrementally as Wyatt patiently showed her around the kitchen, explaining his routines and preferences without any hint of criticism, when she admitted her own cooking skills were basic at best. "We'll figure it out together," he assured her. "I'm no expert myself. Between us, we'll probably manage to keep from starving." When they finally retired for the night, Wyatt bid her good night with a simple courtesy that made her feel both grateful and oddly disappointed. In her room, Beatrice prepared for bed slowly, her mind whirling with conflicting thoughts and feelings. This wasn't what she'd expected. Wyatt wasn't what she'd expected. His patience, his kindness, his obvious desire to make this arrangement into something more than a cold transaction. All of it confused and frightened her in equal measure. She'd armored herself against disappointment by expecting nothing, by framing this as a purely practical arrangement. But Wyatt seemed determined to offer her more, and that terrified her because accepting more meant risking more, meant opening herself to the possibility of being hurt again. Sleep came eventually, fitful and filled with strange dreams of sage-green eyes and gentle voices promising things she didn't dare believe. The next weeks fell into a pattern that was both surprisingly comfortable and subtly unsettling. Beatrice threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life with the same determined practicality she applied to everything. She mastered the temperamental kitchen stove, learned to make bread that didn't turn out like bricks, and figured out the cistern system that brought water into the house. She took over the household duties with quiet efficiency, and if the house began to show small touches of feminine comfort, curtains in the windows and wildflowers in a jar on the table, well, that was just practical improvement of her living space. Wyatt, for his part, proved to be exactly what he'd promised: respectful, patient, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He included her in decisions about the ranch operations, explaining the business side of cattle ranching with the patience of a natural teacher. He brought her books from town, having noticed her longing glances at his modest library. He taught her to ride, choosing a gentle mare named Daisy and spending hours in the corral with her until she could manage basic horsemanship. "You're a natural," he said one afternoon, watching her guide Daisy in a smooth circle. "Knew you would be. You've got good instincts, just needed to trust them. Or trust the horse," Beatrice countered, but she was smiling, exhilarated by the freedom of movement, the sense of control. "That too. Daisy's a good girl, smart as they come. She'll take care of you." It was that evening, after a supper of fried chicken that Beatrice had managed not to burn, that Wyatt suggested a walk to see the sunset from a ridge overlooking the property. They walked in comfortable silence initially, the October air beginning to carry a hint of the coolness that would characterize the winter months. "I never expected this," Beatrice said suddenly, surprising herself. "Any of this." "What exactly?" Wyatt glanced at her with interest. "How beautiful it is here, how peaceful." She gestured at the landscape spread before them, gilded now with the bronze light of approaching sunset. "How decent you are. I thought I knew what I was getting into, but I was wrong. Wrong in a good way or a bad way." There was a tension in Wyatt's voice that suggested her answer mattered more than he wanted to let on. "I don't know yet," Beatrice admitted honestly. "Good, I think, but also scary." "Why scary?" She struggled to find words for the complicated tangle of emotions. "Because I came here expecting a simple transaction. I knew how to handle that, how to protect myself in that kind of arrangement. But you keep offering more, keep trying to make this into something real, and I don't know how to handle that." Wyatt stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Beatrice, I'm not trying to trick you or manipulate you into anything. I'm just being myself and hoping that eventually you'll trust me enough to be yourself too. The real you, not the careful, controlled version who's always waiting for disappointment. What if that is the real me now?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "What if Thomas and everything that happened after changed me into someone who can't believe in more than transactions?" "I don't think that's true." Wyatt reached out slowly and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I see glimpses of someone different sometimes. When you laugh at something Jose says, or when you're working with Daisy, or when you put flowers on the table. Those moments, that's the real you trying to come out. You've just built walls to protect her." Tears prickled at Beatrice's eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "Maybe I built those walls for good reason." "Maybe you did," Wyatt agreed, "and I'm not asking you to tear them down all at once. Just maybe start leaving a few windows open, let some light in. Let yourself consider the possibility that this could be more than a transaction if we both work at it. And if I can't," the fear in her voice was naked, exposed, "what if I've forgotten how to be that person? Then we'll figure it out together." Wyatt squeezed her hand gently. "I'm patient, Beatrice, and I think you're worth being patient for." The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and crimson and deep purple, and standing there with her hand in Wyatt's, Beatrice felt something shift inside her chest. Not a complete transformation, not yet, but the first hairline crack in the armor she'd built so carefully around her heart. November brought cooler temperatures and a different rhythm to ranch work. Wyatt and the hands focused on moving cattle to lower pastures and preparing for winter, while Beatrice continued to learn and adapt to her new life. She'd begun riding out with Wyatt sometimes, ostensibly to bring lunch to him and the hands in the field, but really because she was growing to love the open spaces and the quiet companionship they shared. "Tell me about growing up here," she said one afternoon as they rode back toward the house together. "What was it like?" Wyatt considered the question, guiding his bay gelding around a patch of prickly pear cactus. "Wild, I guess. Literally and figuratively. My parents came out here in '68 when Arizona was still raw territory. My father had dreams of making something from nothing, building a legacy. It was hard on my mother, leaving civilization behind, but she was tough as they come. Had to be to survive out here. You miss them?" Beatrice asked gently. "Every day. Father died in '77, pneumonia. Mother made it another year before her heart gave out. I think she died of missing him more than anything medical." Wyatt's voice carried old grief but also acceptance. "But they built something good here, something lasting. I'm proud to carry it on." "They'd be proud of you too," Beatrice said impulsively. "Of what you've done with the ranch, how you've grown it." Wyatt looked at her with such warmth that she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you." "Why especially from me?" "Because you're smart and practical and you don't say things you don't mean. So when you offer a compliment, I know it's genuine." He paused, then added quietly, "And because I've come to value your good opinion quite a bit." The admission hung between them, weighted with significance. Beatrice found she didn't have a response, or rather, she had too many responses competing for voice. The careful, controlled part of her wanted to deflect, to turn the conversation back to safe, impersonal territory. But that other part, the one that was cautiously emerging from behind its walls, wanted to lean into the moment, to acknowledge the growing connection between them. "I value your opinion as well," she finally managed. "You've been very kind to me, Wyatt. More than kind." patient and generous and thoughtful. I want you to know I notice that. I appreciate it." "That's a start," Wyatt said with a slight smile. "I'll take it." That evening, Beatrice found herself taking extra care with her appearance at supper, pinning her dark hair in a softer style and choosing a dress in a deep blue that she knew complemented her eyes. Wyatt noticed immediately, his gaze lingering on her in a way that made her pulse quicken. "You look lovely," he said simply, and the genuine admiration in his voice made her feel beautiful in a way Thomas's elaborate compliments never had. "Thank you," she replied, and allowed herself a small smile. They were washing dishes together after the meal, Beatrice washing and Wyatt drying, when he suddenly asked, "What did you want to be? Before your circumstances changed, before you had to start thinking practically about survival, what did you dream about?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know that anyone ever asked me that before," she admitted. "Well, I'm asking now." Wyatt set down the dish he'd been drying and gave her his full attention. Beatrice stared down at the soapy water, remembering a younger version of herself with dreams that had seemed foolish even then. "I wanted to write," she said quietly. "Stories, articles, maybe even a book someday. I loved reading, loved the way words could create entire worlds. I used to fill journals with stories and observations, silly, romantic notions. What happened to them? The journals. I burned them." The admission came with a wash of old shame. "After Thomas left, after I understood how naive I'd been about everything, I burned them all. They seemed like evidence of foolishness I needed to put behind me." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "That's about the saddest thing I've ever heard. Not because you burned them, though that's sad enough, but because you decided that having dreams and imagination and hope made you foolish. Those things aren't weaknesses, Beatrice. They're what make life worth living. Easy to say when your dreams haven't been crushed by reality." The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. "My parents died before I was ready to lose them. My father's dream of building an empire out here never fully materialized. I've lost cattle to disease and drought, had workers quit at crucial times, faced loneliness that felt like it would swallow me whole." Wyatt's voice remained steady, factual rather than self-pitying. "Reality has done its share of crushing. But I still get up every morning and try to build something good. Still believe that better days are possible. That's not naive, it's necessary." Beatrice turned to face him, her wet hands dripping onto the floor unnoticed. "How? How do you maintain that optimism?" "By choosing it. Every single day, I choose to believe that the work I'm doing matters, that the life I'm building has value, that good things are possible even if they're not guaranteed." "And lately," he added, his sage green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, "I've been choosing to believe that maybe you and I could build something real together. Not just a practical arrangement, but an actual partnership, maybe even love if we're brave enough to let it happen." The word love hung in the air between them like something fragile and impossibly precious. Beatrice felt panic rise in her throat alongside something that felt dangerously like hope. "Wyatt, You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I'm just being honest about where my thoughts have been heading. You can take all the time you need to figure out your own feelings. I'm not going anywhere." But his honesty demanded honesty in return, and Beatrice found words spilling out before she could think better of them. "I'm scared. I'm terrified, actually, because I can feel myself starting to care about you, and that feels like standing at the edge of a cliff waiting to fall. What if I let myself believe this could be real and then I'm wrong? What if you change your mind or I disappoint you or something happens?" "All of those are possibilities," Wyatt acknowledged. But so is this. What if you let yourself believe and you're right? What if we build something beautiful and lasting? What if you find out that taking the risk was worth it? Aren't those possibilities worth considering too? Beatrice wanted to argue, to retreat behind her careful walls where it was safe. Instead, she found herself taking a small step forward, closing the distance between them. Wyatt stood perfectly still, letting her control the moment, his eyes searching hers. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't remember how to take these kinds of risks." "Then we'll figure it out together," Wyatt said softly. "Start small. Let yourself enjoy my company without analyzing it. Let yourself laugh without feeling guilty. Let yourself consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this is exactly what it appears to be, two people who could make each other happy if they're willing to try." Just like that. But even as she said it, Beatrice felt the tightness in her chest beginning to ease. "Just like that," Wyatt confirmed. Then, moving with careful slowness, he raised a hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You don't have to do anything dramatic or make any big declarations. Just let yourself be present in the moments we share. That's all I'm asking." Beatrice leaned into his touch, allowing herself for once to simply feel without overthinking. His hand was warm and slightly rough against her skin, solid and real. His eyes held hers with such tender understanding that something inside her that had been frozen for 2 long years began to thaw. "I can try," she said finally. "I can't promise more than that, but I can try." "That's all I need," Wyatt said, and smiled at her with such genuine joy that she found herself smiling back. He didn't kiss her then, though she thought maybe she would have let him. Instead, he simply pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms solid and warm around her, and let her rest her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for long minutes, and Beatrice let herself absorb the comfort and safety of the moment without questioning it. December arrived with occasional cold snaps that reminded Beatrice of Boston winters, though nothing like the brutal cold and endless snow she'd grown up with. Christmas approached, and Wyatt suggested they host a small gathering for the ranch hands and a few neighbors. "Nothing fancy," he assured her. "Just some food and company. It's tradition around here, looking after each other during the holidays." Beatrice threw herself into preparations with surprising enthusiasm, baking cookies and pies from recipes Mrs. Henderson from town had shared. She even made an attempt at decorating, fashioning wreaths from pinyon branches and hanging them around the house. Wyatt came in one evening to find her standing on a chair trying to hang one over the fireplace, and immediately rushed to steady her. "Careful there," he said, his hands gripping her waist. "Last thing we need is you falling and breaking something." "I'm perfectly capable of standing on a chair," Beatrice protested, but she didn't pull away from his steadying grip. "Never said you weren't. But I'm also perfectly capable of helping, so you might as well accept it." Wyatt's voice was light, teasing in a way that had become increasingly common between them. Beatrice finished hanging the wreath, and then, instead of immediately climbing down, found herself looking down at Wyatt's upturned face, his hand still at her waist. Something in the moment felt significant, suspended in time. "This is nice," she said softly. "What we've been building here, I want you to know I see that now." Wyatt's smile was brilliant and genuine. "I'm glad, really glad." He helped her down from the chair, but his hands lingered at her waist even after her feet were safely on the ground. "Beatrice, can I kiss you? A real kiss, not just the polite peck from our wedding." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but Beatrice found herself nodding. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you can." Wyatt leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to change her mind, but she didn't want to. His lips met hers softly at first, gentle and questioning, and then with more confidence as she responded. The kiss was nothing like the hasty, aggressive kisses Thomas had stolen in darkened hallways. This was tender and exploring, asking rather than demanding, and it made Beatrice feel cherished rather than claimed. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a bit faster, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that for weeks now," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" Beatrice asked, her hands somehow having found their way to his chest. "Because I wanted you to be ready. Wanted it to be something you wanted, not just something you allowed." Wyatt pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Was it okay?" "It was more than okay," Beatrice said honestly, and felt a smile tugging at her lips. "It was really quite wonderful. Good. Because I'd very much like to do it again sometime. Many times if you're amenable." Beatrice laughed, a genuine sound of delight that surprised them both. "I think I could be amenable to that." The Christmas gathering was a success, with 8 neighbors and the 2 ranch hands filling the house with warmth and laughter. Beatrice found herself genuinely enjoying the company, swapping recipes with the other women and listening to tall tales from the men. Wyatt stayed close to her throughout the evening, a subtle but constant presence that made her feel anchored and supported. "Your husband is clearly besotted," Mrs. Henderson remarked at one point, watching Wyatt across the room with a knowing smile. "That man can't take his eyes off you." "We're still getting to know each other," Beatrice demurred, but pleasure warmed her cheeks. "Some things don't take long to know," the older woman said wisely. "And some men are just built to be good husbands. You got yourself one of the good ones there, dear. Don't waste time being afraid of that." The words stayed with Beatrice after the guests had departed, and she and Wyatt were cleaning up together in companionable silence. Don't waste time being afraid. How much time had she already wasted, she wondered, holding herself back out of fear. "Penny for your thoughts," Wyatt said, interrupting her reverie. "You got awful quiet all of a sudden." "Just thinking about what Mrs. Henderson said to me earlier." Beatrice paused in wiping down the table and looked at Wyatt directly, "about not wasting time being afraid." "Sounds like good advice to me," Wyatt said carefully, clearly trying not to push. "It is good advice." Beatrice set down her cloth and crossed to where Wyatt stood by the sink. "I've been thinking about something and I wanted to talk to you about it." "All right." Wyatt gave her his full attention, his expression open and patient. "You've been sleeping in your own room since I arrived, giving me space and time like you promised. And I've appreciated that, truly. But I think I'm ready for that to change." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced herself to continue. "If you're still interested, that is." Wyatt's eyes widened slightly and then a slow smile spread across his face. "I'm definitely still interested. But are you sure? There's no rush, Beatrice. We can keep taking things slow." "I know we can. But I don't want to anymore. I want to be your wife in all the ways that means. I want to stop holding back out of fear of something that might never happen." She reached out and took his hand. "I want to start building our life together for real." Wyatt pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a warm embrace. "You have no idea how happy that makes me," he murmured against her hair. "But I need you to know something first. This isn't about claiming rights or fulfilling obligations. This is about us choosing each other, being together because we want to be. And if you change your mind at any point, that's okay too. This has to feel right for both of us." Beatrice pulled back enough to look up at him, touched by his consideration even now. "It does feel right. For the first time since I came here, maybe for the first time in years, something feels right." He kissed her then, and this kiss was different from the one earlier, deeper and more urgent, carrying promise and desire. When he swept her up into his arms and carried her toward the stairs, Beatrice didn't protest. Instead, She wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself trust, let herself hope, let herself believe that maybe transformation truly was possible. The winter months passed in a blur of deepening intimacy and growing connection. Beatrice found herself falling in love almost against her will, discovering daily new reasons to admire and care for the man she'd married. Wyatt's patience, his kindness, his steady presence, all of it worked to heal the wounds Thomas had left behind and show her what a real partnership could look like. "I've been thinking about something," she said one evening in February as they sat together by the fire, Beatrice's feet tucked under her and her head resting on Wyatt's shoulder. "About what you said months ago about my writing. What about it?" Wyatt's fingers traced idle patterns on her arm, comfortable and affectionate. "I think I'd like to try again. Not the romantic stories I used to write, but maybe observations about life out here. The territory, the people, the challenges and beauties of ranch life. There are stories here worth telling." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Wyatt said warmly. "I'd be honored to be part of your stories if you want to include me." "You're already part of my story," Beatrice said softly, turning to look up at him. "The best part, actually. You took someone who thought love was just a transaction and showed her it could be transformation instead. That's worth writing about." Wyatt's eyes glistened suspiciously in the firelight. "You love me," he said, wonder clear in his voice. "You haven't said it outright before." "I love you," Beatrice repeated, the words coming easier this time. "I fought it for so long, tried to keep it practical and distant, but you wore down my defenses with patience and kindness and genuine care. I love you, Wyatt Nichols, and I'm grateful every day that I answered your advertisement." "I love you too," Wyatt said roughly, pulling her close. "So damn much. From the moment you stepped off that train looking terrified but determined, trying so hard to be brave, I wanted to protect you and know you and maybe find a way to make you smile for real. I love the woman you were hiding behind all those walls, and I love that you trusted me enough to let her out." They made love there by the firelight, tender and passionate, and filled with the emotion they'd both finally acknowledged. Afterward, wrapped in quilts and each other's arms, Beatrice felt peace settle over her like a benediction. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new challenges that Beatrice faced with growing confidence. She'd become a competent horsewoman, capable of riding out to help move cattle when needed. She'd taken over the household accounts and proved to have a head for numbers that impressed Wyatt. She'd even begun writing, filling journal pages with observations and stories that she shared with Wyatt in the evenings to his obvious delight. "You have real talent," he told her after reading a piece she'd written about a day helping with cattle branding. "This is engaging and funny and gives a real sense of what the work is like. Have you thought about submitting something to a newspaper or magazine?" "Don't be ridiculous," Beatrice protested, though pleasure colored her cheeks. "I'm just writing for my own amusement. I'm serious. The Hallbrook Tribune is always looking for content, and there are magazines back east that publish stories about Western life. You should at least consider it." The idea took root, growing over the following weeks until Beatrice finally screwed up her courage and submitted a piece to the Tribune. When it was accepted and published, with her name proudly printed beneath the title, she nearly cried with joy. "I'm so proud of you," Wyatt said, pulling her into a fierce hug. "This is just the beginning, I know it. You're going to do amazing things." "We're going to do amazing things," Beatrice corrected. "Together." May brought unseasonably warm weather and another surprise. Morning sickness that sent Beatrice running for the basin several days in a row before she finally acknowledged what her body was telling her. She was pregnant, carrying Wyatt's child, and the realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. "Are you happy about it?" She asked Wyatt that evening after sharing the news, needing reassurance despite his obvious delight. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Wyatt assured her, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. A baby, Beatrice, our baby. I can't think of anything I want more than a family with you. I'm scared, she admitted. Of something going wrong, of not being a good mother, of all the ways this could be difficult. Those are normal fears, Wyatt said gently. But we'll face them together, just like we've faced everything else. You're strong and capable, and you're going to be an amazing mother. And I'll be right there beside you every step of the way. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Beatrice's worries. Wyatt was attentive to the point of being slightly overbearing, constantly checking on her and trying to prevent her from doing anything he considered too strenuous. Beatrice tolerated his fussing with amusement and exasperation in equal measure. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she reminded him after he'd insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that she was perfectly capable of handling. Women have been doing this for thousands of years while still managing their daily work. Humor me, Wyatt pleaded. You're carrying the most precious thing in my world. I just want to make sure you're both safe. How could she argue with that kind of devotion? Beatrice found herself falling even more deeply in love with her husband, as he proved over and over that his care for her was genuine and lasting. In August, she received word that one of her pieces had been accepted by a magazine in San Francisco and would be published with payment of $20. The achievement felt monumental, proof that she could build something meaningful with her talents. I never could have done this without you, she told Wyatt that evening. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You showed me that it was safe to dream again. You did the work, Wyatt countered. I just provided encouragement. The talent and determination were always yours, Beatrice. I'm just glad you found your way back to them. Their son was born in January of 1885, on a cold but clear night with a midwife from town attending, and Wyatt pacing anxiously in the next room. The labor was difficult but not unusually so, and when Beatrice finally held the squalling infant in her arms, she felt a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. He's perfect, Wyatt breathed when he was finally allowed in to meet his son. Look at him, Beatrice. We made this perfect little person. What should we name him? Beatrice asked, exhausted but glowing with joy. I was thinking maybe Matthew, Wyatt suggested. After your father, if that's all right with you. Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes at the thoughtful gesture. Matthew Nichols. I love it. Little Matthew proved to be a healthy, happy baby with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. Watching Wyatt with their son, Beatrice marveled at the gentleness and patience he showed. He was as involved in childcare as she was, changing diapers and walking the floor during fussy nights without complaint. You're an amazing father, she told him one evening, watching him rock Matthew to sleep with practiced ease. Learning as I go, same as you, Wyatt replied quietly, careful not to wake the drowsy infant. But it's the best thing I've ever done, building this family with you. Some days I still can't believe how lucky I got when you answered that advertisement. I was the lucky one, Beatrice countered. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. Love, partnership, purpose, transformation. You showed me that life could be about so much more than just surviving. Over the next several years, their life together deepened and grew. Beatrice continued writing, building a modest reputation for her insightful and entertaining pieces about Western life. She published regularly in several newspapers and magazines, and the income, while not substantial, provided her with a sense of independence and accomplishment that meant the world to her. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Beatrice's head for numbers combined with Wyatt's ranching knowledge proved to be a formidable combination. They expanded their herd, improved their water systems, and built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. In the spring of 1887, Beatrice gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah. 2 years later came another son, Thomas, and then in 1892, twin girls they named Emily and Grace. Each child was welcomed with joy and raised with the same combination of love, structure, and encouragement that characterized everything Wyatt and Beatrice did together. "Our house is full of chaos," Beatrice said one evening as she surveyed the living room filled with scattered toys and playing children. "Sometimes I can't quite believe this is my life." "Good chaos," Wyatt said, pulling her close and kissing her temple. "The best kind of chaos. Though I wouldn't object to a few minutes of peace if we could manage it." "The children will be asleep eventually," Beatrice said with a knowing smile, "and then we'll have the whole evening to ourselves." "I like the sound of that," Wyatt murmured against her hair. "Even after all these years, I never get tired of spending time alone with my wife." "Flatterer," Beatrice accused, but she was smiling. "Truth-teller," Wyatt corrected. "I fell in love with you 10 years ago on a dusty train platform, and I've been falling deeper ever since." "You're the best decision I ever made." Beatrice Nichols. In the autumn of 1893, Beatrice received word that a publisher in New York was interested in compiling her articles into a book about life in the Arizona Territory. The opportunity was both thrilling and terrifying, representing a validation of her work she'd never quite dared to hope for. "You have to do it," Wyatt insisted when she expressed doubts. "This is an amazing opportunity. Your words deserve to be read widely, and this could open doors to even more opportunities. It would mean a lot of work, revising and editing, maybe writing new material to tie everything together," Beatrice worried. "And I already have so much to manage with the children and the ranch." "We'll figure it out," Wyatt assured her. "We always do. I can take on more of the household duties and the older children can help more too. This is important, Beatrice. Your dreams and your talents matter, not just your work as a mother and ranch wife. All of it matters." With Wyatt's support, Beatrice threw herself into the project. It took nearly a year of work, stolen hours early in the morning and late at night, but she finally completed the manuscript. Tales from the Territory, A Woman's View of Life in Arizona, was published in the summer of 1895 to surprisingly positive reviews. It didn't make Beatrice famous or wealthy, but it established her as a voice worth listening to. And more importantly, it represented the complete transformation of a woman who'd once thought her dreams were foolish luxuries she couldn't afford. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythms of ranch life and family growth. Their children grew healthy and happy, each developing their own personalities and interests. Matthew showed his father's talent with horses and cattle. Sarah inherited her mother's love of words and was constantly scribbling stories in notebooks. The younger children were still finding their way, but they all thrived in the environment of love and security their parents had built. In 1898, as Arizona Territory continued to push toward eventual statehood, Wyatt and Beatrice celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a special dinner in town at the newly opened hotel restaurant. Their older children stayed home to watch the younger ones, giving their parents a rare evening alone together. 15 years, Beatrice mused, sipping wine and looking at her husband across the candlelit table. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I stepped off that train, terrified and trying so hard to seem composed. You seemed so determined to keep everything businesslike, Wyatt remembered with a smile. Kept calling it a transaction, kept trying to maintain emotional distance. I was so worried I'd never get past those walls you'd built. I'm glad you were patient with me, Beatrice said softly. I needed time to learn to trust again, to believe that genuine love was possible. You gave me that time without making me feel pressured or inadequate. That gift of patience was everything. It was worth it, Wyatt said simply. Every moment of uncertainty was worth it to get to where we are now. You and our children, the life we've built together. It's more than I ever dreamed of having when I placed that advertisement. I came here thinking marriage would be a transaction, Beatrice reflected, echoing the thoughts that had occupied her mind so many years ago. I was so focused on survival and security that I couldn't see the possibility of anything more. But you showed me it could be transformation instead. You transformed my understanding of love, of partnership, of what was possible when two people genuinely commit to building a life together. You transformed me too, Wyatt said, reaching across the table to take her hand. You made me better, made my life fuller and richer. You brought beauty and purpose and depth to everything. I was just a rancher with a lonely house before you came. You turned it into a home filled with love and laughter and meaning. They finished their dinner and walked back to the wagon in the cool evening air, arms wrapped around each other. On the ride back to the ranch, Beatrice leaned against Wyatt's shoulder and looked up at the stars scattered across the vast Arizona sky. "Are you happy?" Wyatt asked, the question he'd asked many times over the years, always wanting to make sure she was content with the life they'd built. "Extraordinarily happy," Beatrice answered with complete honesty. "Sometimes I think about that scared woman who came here 15 years ago, armored against disappointment and convinced that survival was the best she could hope for. I wish I could tell her not to be afraid, that she was about to meet someone who would teach her that love was real and lasting and worth the risk of believing." "What would she have done if you told her that?" Wyatt asked with amusement. "Probably not believed me," Beatrice admitted with a laugh. "She was stubborn and scared and so determined not to be hurt again. But maybe she would have been a little less guarded, a little more open to the possibilities. Or maybe she needed to discover it all in her own time, at her own pace." "Everything happened exactly as it needed to," Wyatt said with conviction. "We found our way to each other, learned to trust and love each other and built something real and lasting. That's all that matters." When they arrived home, the house was blessedly quiet, with the children all asleep, and a note from Matthew saying everything had gone smoothly. Wyatt and Beatrice made their way to their bedroom, the one they'd shared for over 14 years now, and prepared for bed with the comfortable ease of long familiarity. "I never get tired of this," Beatrice said as she settled into Wyatt's arms. "Just being close to you, feeling safe and loved. It's still my favorite part of every day." "Mine too," Wyatt murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Though I have to say, every part of the day is pretty good when I get to spend it with you." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious. The years that followed brought their share of challenges and occasional hardships. There were difficult seasons for the ranch, illnesses that had to be weathered, the normal struggles of raising children and managing a household. But through everything, Wyatt and Beatrice faced life as true partners, supporting each other with unwavering devotion. In 1902, Beatrice published her second book, a collection of new essays along with reflections on how the territory had changed over the nearly 20 years she'd lived there. By then, she'd become a respected voice on Western life, and her work was read across the country. She still marveled sometimes that the woman who'd burned her journals in bitter disappointment had found her way back to her passion, had discovered that dreams were worth pursuing after all. Their children grew into young adults who reflected the values their parents had instilled. Matthew took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication and integrity his father had always demonstrated. Sarah pursued teaching, inspired by her mother's love of words and learning. The younger children were still finding their paths, but they did so secure in the knowledge that they were loved and supported unconditionally. On a warm spring evening in 1905, Wyatt and Beatrice sat together on the porch they had built several years earlier, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. It had become their habit in recent years, this quiet time together at day's end, a chance to reconnect and reflect. "Do you remember what you told me the day we met?" Beatrice asked, her hand entwined with Wyatt's. "You said you were looking for a partner, not a servant, that you wanted to do right by me." "I remember," Wyatt confirmed. "I meant every word, though I was pretty nervous about whether you'd give me a chance to prove it." "You've proven it every single day for 22 years, Beatrice said softly. "You've been everything you promised and so much more. You took a woman who thought she had to protect herself from disappointment and showed her that vulnerability and trust were strengths, not weaknesses. You transformed my entire understanding of what love could be. And you took a lonely rancher with a practical advertisement and showed him what it meant to truly share a life with someone," Wyatt replied. "You brought joy and depth and meaning to everything. You're the best partner I could have ever hoped for, Beatrice." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their land stretch out before them in the fading light. The ranch had grown substantially over the years, now employing 6 permanent hands and supporting a herd of over 1,000 cattle. But the success and prosperity mattered far less than the family they'd built, the love that had sustained them through 2 decades of challenges and triumphs. "I've been thinking," Beatrice said eventually, "about maybe starting a 3rd book, not just essays this time, but an actual memoir. The story of how a terrified mail-order bride from Boston learned to love the Arizona territory, and more importantly, learned to love and trust again." "That sounds like a book worth reading," Wyatt said warmly, "though I might be biased, given that I'd probably feature prominently in it." "You'd be the hero of the story," Beatrice confirmed with a smile. "The patient cowboy who saw past all my defenses and convinced me that transformation was possible, that love could be real and lasting if I was brave enough to accept it." "I'm not sure I deserve hero status," Wyatt protested. "I just loved you the best way I knew how and hoped it would be enough." "It was more than enough," Beatrice assured him. "It was everything I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it. You saved me, Wyatt, not from poverty or hardship, though you did that too, but from a life without hope, without dreams, without the belief that good things were possible. That's what you really gave me, the courage to believe again." Wyatt pulled her close, and they sat wrapped in each other's arms as darkness fell gently over the land they'd built their lives on. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family, the normal noise and activity of a household filled with love and life. It was everything Beatrice had never dared to hope for when she'd answered that advertisement so many years ago, and everything Wyatt had dreamed of when he'd placed it. As the years continued to unfold, Wyatt and Beatrice grew old together with grace and gratitude. They saw their children marry and start families of their own. They welcomed grandchildren with joy and took pride in watching the next generation grow. The ranch continued to prosper under Matthew's management, with Wyatt gradually stepping back from daily operations while still serving as advisor and consultant. Beatrice's memoir was published in 1908 to her widest readership yet. From Transaction to Transformation: A Mail-Order Bride's Journey, resonated with readers across the country, particularly women who saw their own struggles and hopes reflected in her honest account. She received letters from across the nation, women thanking her for showing that second chances were possible, that love could heal old wounds, that transformation was real. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, their children organized a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from across the territory. The house and grounds were filled with people whose lives had been touched by Wyatt and Beatrice over the decades, testament to the impact they'd had on their community. 30 years. Beatrice marveled as she and Wyatt danced together under strings of lanterns their children had hung. 3 decades of love and partnership and growth. Sometimes I still can't believe how blessed I've been. We've been blessed together, Wyatt corrected gently. His hair was silver now, his face lined with years of sun and hard work, but his sage-green eyes still looked at her with the same love and wonder they'd held 3 decades earlier. Every day with you has been a gift, Beatrice. Even the hard days, the struggles and challenges, they were all worth it because we faced them together. I love you, Beatrice said simply, the words she'd once been so afraid to speak now coming easily after years of repetition. I love you more with every passing year. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Wyatt Nichols, the absolute best thing. The feeling is entirely mutual, Wyatt assured her, pulling her close as they swayed to the music. You're my heart, Beatrice. Always have been, always will be. As Arizona moved closer to statehood, finally achieving it in 1912, Wyatt and Beatrice moved with it, adapting to changes while maintaining the core values that had guided their life together. They remained active in their community, supporting education initiatives and helping younger families get established. Beatrice continued to write, though less frequently now, her focus shifting to mentoring younger writers and supporting local literary efforts. In the spring of 1918, as the world reeled from war and Spanish flu, Wyatt and Beatrice celebrated 35 years of marriage in quiet simplicity. They'd been fortunate to escape the worst of the pandemic, though the isolation and fear had touched everyone. On a clear morning in May, they rode out together to their favorite ridge overlooking the ranch, a trip they made less frequently now but still treasured. You ever regret it? Beatrice asked, a question she hadn't posed in decades. Advertising for a mail-order bride. Taking a chance on a stranger. Never, Wyatt answered without hesitation. Not for one single moment. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A true partner, a loving wife, a family, a life filled with meaning and purpose. How could I possibly regret any of that? I used to think love was just a pretty lie people told themselves, Beatrice admitted, looking out over the land they'd worked together for 35 years. I thought the only honest approach was to treat relationships as transactions, mutual arrangements for practical benefit. But you showed me how wrong I was. Love isn't a lie or a transaction. It's a choice you make every day, a commitment to keep showing up and caring and trying. It's work and joy and transformation all wrapped together. That's beautiful, Wyatt said softly. You should write that down. Maybe I will, Beatrice agreed with a smile. Though I think I've written enough about us over the years, at some point our story is just meant to be lived, not documented. They sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd grown so intertwined over 3.5 decades that they could communicate in glances and touches as easily as words. They'd built something rare and precious, a marriage that had started as a practical arrangement but had grown into genuine, transformative love. The years that followed were gentle ones, marked by increasing age but also increasing appreciation for simple pleasures. Wyatt and Beatrice delighted in their grandchildren, of whom there were now 9 with more on the way. They continued to support each other through health challenges and the inevitable losses that came with age, friends, and peers passing, their world gradually shrinking even as their family expanded. In 1925, on the eve of their 42nd anniversary, Beatrice sat at her desk composing a letter to her eldest granddaughter, who'd written asking for relationship advice. She smiled as she wrote, thinking how far she'd come from the frightened woman who'd believed love was a dangerous illusion. "The secret," she wrote, "is finding someone who sees you not just as you are, but as you could become. Someone who believes in your potential even when you've forgotten it exists. Your grandfather did that for me. He saw past my fear and armor to the person I'd hidden away, and he patiently, lovingly, helped me find my way back to myself. That's what real love does. It doesn't demand that you be perfect. It helps you transform into the best version of yourself." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "But here's the important part. Transformation is a choice. Your grandfather couldn't have forced me to change, to open up, to trust again. He could only create an environment where those things felt safe. I had to make the choice to let down my walls, to risk being hurt again, to believe that maybe this time would be different. And that choice, that act of courage, it made all the difference." Wyatt came in as she was sealing the envelope, and Beatrice smiled up at him with all the love of 4 decades reflected in her expression. "Writing advice to young Catherine," she explained. "She's worried about whether her young man really cares for her." "What did you tell her?" Wyatt asked with interest. "That the right person will be patient and kind and will want to know the real her, not just the version she thinks she should be. That love should feel like transformation, not transaction. Basically, I told her to look for someone like you." "Setting an awfully high standard there," Wyatt teased, but his eyes were warm with pleasure at the compliment. "The only standard worth having," Beatrice countered. She stood and crossed to where he waited, fitting herself against his side with the ease of long practice. "You set the bar for what love should be, Wyatt. Every day for 42 years, you've shown me what it means to truly love someone, to choose them continuously, to support their dreams, to create a partnership built on respect and genuine care. That's what I want for our grandchildren. That's what everyone should have. Not everyone is lucky enough to find it," Wyatt acknowledged. "But those who do, who find that kind of transformative love, they've found something worth treasuring." "We found each other," Beatrice said simply. Against all odds, across the miles, a lonely rancher and a frightened mail-order bride found each other and built something beautiful. That's worth treasuring indeed. They spent their anniversary quietly that year, surrounded by family but mostly just enjoying each other's company. There were toasts and reminiscences, laughter and love, but the moment Beatrice treasured most came late in the evening when she and Wyatt were finally alone again. 42 years, Wyatt said, echoing the thoughts from anniversaries past. "Sometimes it seems impossible that so much time has passed. Other times, I can't remember what life was like before you were part of it." "I know exactly what life was like before," Beatrice said quietly. "Empty, frightening, limited. I existed, but I didn't really live. You taught me how to live, Wyatt, how to hope and dream and love. You taught me that transformation was possible if I was brave enough to accept it." "You taught me plenty too," Wyatt replied. "You taught me that patience is worth it, that love grows deeper with time, that building a life with someone you respect and admire is the greatest adventure there is. You made me better, Beatrice. In every possible way, you made me better." They held each other close as the night deepened around them. Two people who'd found in each other exactly what they'd needed, even when they hadn't known to look for it. Their story, which had started with a simple advertisement and a desperate woman's practical response, had grown into something epic and beautiful, a testament to the power of patience, kindness, and the courage to believe in transformation. As they drifted toward sleep that night, Beatrice reflected on the incredible journey they'd shared. From that first awkward meeting on a dusty train platform to this moment of deep, abiding love, they'd traveled so far together. They'd built a ranch, raised a family, created a legacy that would extend through generations. But more than any of that, they'd proved that love, real transformative love, was possible for those brave enough to believe in it. She'd thought marriage would be a transaction when she'd boarded that train to Arizona territory all those years ago. She'd been so focused on survival and security that she couldn't imagine anything beyond a practical arrangement. But Wyatt had shown her a different path. He'd shown her that marriage could be partnership and friendship and adventure. He'd shown her that love could heal old wounds and create new possibilities. He'd shown her that transformation wasn't just possible, it was inevitable when two people committed to growing together. In the years that followed, Wyatt and Beatrice continued to grow old together with grace. They celebrated 45 years, then 50, milestones that seemed almost miraculous given how their union had started. Their golden anniversary in 1933 brought family from across the state, their children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren gathering to celebrate a love that had endured and deepened through 5 decades. "Tell us the story," one of their young great-grandchildren pleaded during the celebration. "Tell us how you met." Beatrice smiled and looked at Wyatt, who nodded encouragingly. "Your great-grandfather placed an advertisement in a Boston newspaper," she began, her voice still strong despite her years. "He was looking for a wife, and I was looking for security and a fresh start. I thought it would be a simple business arrangement, nothing more." "But Grandpa had other ideas," one of their grandchildren added with a knowing smile. "He did indeed," Beatrice confirmed warmly. "He had the radical idea that we could actually get to know each other, that we could build a real partnership based on respect and genuine care. I was terrified of that. I'd been hurt before, and I'd decided the safest approach was to keep everything businesslike and distant." "What changed your mind?" the young child asked with wide eyes. "Your great-grandfather's patience and kindness," Beatrice answered simply. "He never pushed me or demanded more than I was ready to give. He just kept showing up, kept being thoughtful and considerate, kept proving that he was different from what I'd experienced before. Slowly, I began to trust him. Slowly, I began to let myself hope that maybe love could be real after all." "And they lived happily ever after," the child concluded with satisfaction. "We did," Wyatt confirmed, his aged hand finding Beatrice's and squeezing gently, "though it wasn't always easy. Building a life together, raising a family, running a ranch through droughts and depressions and wars, none of that is easy. But we did it together, and that made all the difference." "The secret," Beatrice added, wanting to impart this wisdom to the younger generations, "is choosing each other every single day. Love isn't just a feeling that happens to you. It's a choice you make, a commitment you renew constantly. Your great-grandfather and I have chosen each other every day for 50 years, and that's why we're still here, still happy, still deeply in love." The celebration continued around them, but Beatrice found herself reflecting on how true those words were. She and Wyatt had built their marriage on daily choices, on small acts of kindness and consideration that accumulated over time into something profound and unshakable. They transformed each other and been transformed by their love, growing into better versions of themselves through the partnership they'd created. As the sun began to set on their golden anniversary, Wyatt and Beatrice slipped away from the crowd to their favorite spot, the ridge overlooking the ranch. It was harder to make the trip now. Their bodies aged and less reliable, but some traditions were worth maintaining. 50 years, Beatrice marveled, looking out over the land they'd worked together for so long. Half a century of love and life together. It's more than I ever dreamed possible when I stepped off that train, terrified and trying so hard to seem brave. You were brave, Wyatt corrected gently. Maybe the bravest person I've ever known. You'd been hurt badly, but you still got on that train. You still gave us a chance. That took real courage. I didn't feel very courageous, Beatrice admitted. I felt desperate and scared, but I suppose sometimes courage is just desperation in disguise. Or maybe, Wyatt suggested, desperation is what forces us to be courageous when we wouldn't choose it otherwise. Either way, I'm grateful you found your way to me. These 50 years have been the best of my life, Beatrice. Every single day with you has been a gift, even the hard days. Beatrice asked with a slight smile. Especially the hard days, Wyatt confirmed. Because those were the days we proved what we're made of, proved that our love could weather any storm. Those days, as much as the easy ones, they built something lasting. They sat together in comfortable silence, as the sky painted itself in brilliant sunset colors. Two people who'd found in each other everything they'd needed to transform their lives. Beatrice thought about the advertisement she'd answered 50 years ago, about the coldly practical letter she'd written in response. She thought about how wrong she'd been to think marriage could ever be just a transaction, about how Wyatt had taught her what transformation truly meant. She thought about the life they'd built together, the ranch and the family, and the love that had sustained them through 5 decades of challenges and joys. She thought about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become, and she knew without question that the transformation had been worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words carrying the weight of 50 years of gratitude. "For what?" Wyatt asked, though his smile suggested he knew. "For everything. For your patience when I was scared and closed off. For your kindness when I expected coldness. For your love when I thought I didn't deserve it. For showing me that transformation was possible, that love could be real, that I could trust again. You gave me back my life, Wyatt. You gave me back myself." "You did the same for me," Wyatt replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You filled my empty house with warmth and laughter. You challenged me to be better, to think deeper, to build something meaningful. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just survival. You transformed my life just as much as I transformed yours. We did it together, Beatrice. That's the magic of it. We transformed each other." As darkness fell over the Arizona landscape they'd called home for 50 years, Wyatt and Beatrice made their way slowly back to the house, filled with their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They walked hand in hand, moving carefully but confidently, secure in the knowledge that they'd built something rare and precious together. The mail-order bride from Boston and the lonely rancher from Arizona Territory had taken a cold transaction and transformed it into a love story for the ages. They'd proved that courage and patience and daily choices could build something lasting. They'd shown that transformation was possible for those brave enough to believe in it, and they'd created a legacy of love that would echo through the generations they'd brought into the world. Their story, which had started with fear and practicality, had become a testament to the power of real, transformative love. And as they entered their house surrounded by the family they'd created, Beatrice and Wyatt knew that every moment of their 50 years together had been worth it, that the love they'd built would endure long after they were gone. A gift to the future, and a reminder that the best things in life are worth the courage it takes to believe in them.